I am Ava, 29 years old, and I am the silent owner of one of the most successful venture capital firms in New York. To the world, I am a ghost, a name hidden behind shell companies and anonymous trusts. To my family, I am simply the disappointment who left home 5 years ago with nothing. Today, I am returning to the scene of the crime not to seek their approval, but to witness their downfall. My mother convinced my boyfriend to marry my sister. She told him, "She is stronger and better for you." I was heartbroken when I found out and moved away to build my life. Years later, we reunited at a grand party thrown by me, and when they saw my husband, their faces turned pale because my husband was not who they expected. They thought I was still the weak 22-year-old girl crying in the rain that day. But when the doors of the villa opened, they did not just face me. They faced the man who held the financial fate of their entire family in his hands. The gravel of the driveway crunched softly beneath the tires of my black sedan. It was a nondescript vehicle, the kind that blends into traffic, chosen specifically for its ability to go unnoticed. My family waiting on the other side of those massive oak doors valued flash over substance. They would see a boring black car and assume I was struggling. They would not know that the vehicle was bulletproof, custom-engineered, and worth more than the entire mortgage of my mother's house. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror one last time. My makeup was minimal, my hair pulled back in a severe, elegant bun. I wore a charcoal gray suit tailored to perfection by a master in Milan. No logos, no flashy branding, just quiet, undeniable quality. I took a deep breath, inhaling the salty air of the Hamptons. This resort, the Azure Coast, was the premier destination for the East Coast elite. My mother had been bragging for months that my sister Bella and her husband Marcus had rented the entire estate for her 30th wedding anniversary. She told every cousin, every neighbor, and every old friend that her successful daughter and son-in-law were treating her like royalty. The truth was far more amusing. Bella and Marcus were drowning in credit card debt. They could barely afford the rental on their leased SUV, let alone a weekend at the Azure Coast. I was the one who had quietly instructed the resort management to comp the entire event under the strict condition of anonymity. I wanted them to feel high and mighty. I wanted them to climb as high as possible, so the fall would break every bone in their egos. I stepped out of the car. The ocean breeze whipped at my jacket as I walked toward the entrance. Before I could even reach the stairs, the double doors swung open. It was Bella. She was wearing a dress that screamed for attention, a neon pink ball gown covered in sequins that caught the afternoon sun in the most aggressive way possible. It was a rental. I recognized the designer from a collection released 3 years ago, but on her it looked cheap. She swirled a glass of champagne in her hand, her eyes scanning me from head to toe with a practiced sneer. "Well, look who finally decided to show up," Bella called out, her voice shrill enough to carry over the sound of the nearby waves. She didn't come down the stairs to greet me. She stood at the top, forcing me to look up at her. I walked up the steps, my face a mask of calm. "Hello, Bella. Happy anniversary to Mom and Dad." Bella let out a sharp, mocking laugh. She gestured to my suit with her free hand, spilling a little champagne on the stone steps. "Seriously, Ava? That is what you wore?" "It is a celebration, not a funeral. That suit looks like something you picked up at a discount rack 2 seasons ago. God, it is depressing." I smoothed the lapel of my jacket, feeling the exquisite texture of the vicuna wool. It cost $12,000, but to Bella, if it didn't have a giant gold logo on the chest, it was garbage. "I prefer comfort," I said, simply keeping my voice low and steady. Bella rolled her eyes. "Comfort is just a code word for poor Ava. You know, if you are that desperate for cash, Marcus could probably get you a job at his company. They are always looking for people to run coffee or do the filing. He has a lot of pull now. Maybe you could finally afford a dress that doesn't make you look like a librarian." I smiled a small, tight smile that didn't reach my eyes. "That is very generous of you, Bella. I will keep it in mind." Before she could launch another insult, the doors opened wider, and my mother Linda stepped out. She was draped in faux fur despite the warm weather and weighed down by enough gold jewelry to sink a small boat. Her eyes darted past me, scanning the driveway, looking for a luxury car that wasn't there. When her gaze landed on my black sedan, her face fell in visible disappointment. Ava, she said, her tone flat. No hug, no hello. She walked right up to me, her eyes narrowing as she inspected my empty hands. Hello, Mom. You look festive. Festive, she scoffed. I look like the mother of a successful dynasty, or at least half of a dynasty. She leaned in her perfume, overpowering the scent of the ocean. I see you came alone. Good. I was terrified you were going to drag along some old broke husband and embarrass us in front of the guests. We have investors here, Ava. Important people. We do not need your tragic life bringing down the property value. The sting was familiar, like an old injury that flared up in the rain. Years ago, that comment would have made me cry. I would have begged for her approval. I would have tried to explain that I was happy. But the Ava who craved her mother's love died the day she pushed Marcus into Bella's arms. I didn't bring anyone, I said, my voice eerily calm. I thought it best to keep things focused on the family. My mother let out a huff of agreement. Smartest thing you have done in years. Now come inside and try not to get in the way. Bella and Marcus have worked so hard to pay for all of this. Try to show some gratitude by making yourself invisible. Family should be a sanctuary, but for me it was a battlefield. If you have ever been underestimated by the very people who were supposed to love you, hit that like button right now. I followed them into the grand foyer. The resort was breathtaking with vaulted ceilings and marble floors that reflected the crystal chandeliers. I had approved the renovations myself 6 months ago, signing the checks from my office in Manhattan. Now I watched my mother parade through the hall as if she owned the place, greeting aunts and uncles with loud, boisterous lies about Bella's generosity. I tried to slip toward the side of the room, intending to find a quiet corner to observe, but a hand shot out and grabbed my arm. It was Marcus. He had aged. That was the first thing I noticed. The college athlete I had once loved was gone, replaced by a man who looked puffy and tired. He wore a suit that was too tight across the shoulders, and his smile was a little too wide, a little too desperate. He pulled me aside, away from the crowd, his grip firm. Ava, he said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. He looked around nervously to make sure Bella wasn't watching. Marcus, I said, pulling my arm free from his grasp. You are wrinkling my suit. He laughed, a dry, humorless sound. Still uptight, I see. Look, I just want to make one thing clear. Do not ruin this for me. I tilted my head, studying him like a specimen in a jar. Ruin what exactly? I am just a guest, Marcus. Don't play dumb, he hissed, stepping closer. I can smell the bitterness on you. I know you still hate me. I know you are still angry about what happened 5 years ago. You mean when my mother told you to leave me for Bella because she had better genes? I asked, my face expressionless. Marcus flinched, but quickly recovered his arrogance. She was right, Ava. Look at us. Look at this party. Bella pushed me to be better. She helped me climb the ladder. I am a director of marketing now. I am about to close a merger that will put me in the C-suite. And you, what do you have? You are nearly 30, single, and still dressing like a nun. He adjusted his tie, puffing out his chest. I did you a favor, Ava. You were too soft for the world I live in. You would have held me back. So do not go around telling people sob stories about how I broke your heart. Just eat your free food, drink the champagne I paid for, and keep your mouth shut. I stared at him, feeling a wave of cold amusement wash over me. He really believed it. He believed he paid for the champagne. He believed he was successful. He stood there lecturing me about the real world, completely unaware of the reality of his situation. He didn't know that the merger he was bragging about was with a subsidiary of my husband's conglomerate. He didn't know that his company had been acquired at 9 a.m. this morning. And he certainly didn't know that the new ownership had flagged the marketing department for an immediate audit due to gross incompetence and embezzlement. Marcus thought he was a king standing in his castle. He had no idea he was a trespasser standing in mine. You are right, Marcus, I said softly. I was too soft back then. But people change. He smirked, mistaking my calm for submission. Good. Glad you know your place. Now, if you will excuse me, I have important people to network with. Try not to embarrass us. He turned and walked away, strutting toward the bar where my mother was holding court. I watched him go, a small, cold smile finally touching my lips. I reached into my pocket and touched the phone that contained the digital keys to everything they thought they owned. The party was just beginning, and they were already dancing on the edge of a cliff. All I had to do was wait for the right moment to give them a little push. The grand ballroom of the Azure Coast was a masterpiece of architectural design, a fact I knew intimately because I had personally approved the blueprints 2 years ago. The vaulted ceilings soared 30 feet high, adorned with crystal chandeliers that I had imported from a defunct palace in Austria. The floor was made of rare Italian marble, cool and smooth under my feet, and the walls were lined with silk tapestries that cost more than my brother-in-law earned in a decade. As I walked in, I felt a quiet sense of pride. This was my sanctuary, my investment, my creation. But to everyone else in the room, I was just a guest, lucky enough to be allowed inside. I headed toward the center of the room where the tables were draped in heavy linen and set with fine china. My natural instinct was to move toward the head table. In every other aspect of my life, in every boardroom and charity gala in Manhattan, that was where I belonged. But before I could take another step, a hand shot out and blocked my path. It was my mother, Linda. She was holding a laminated seating chart like it was a royal decree. "Not so fast, Ava," she said, her voice dripping with that specific blend of pity and disdain she reserved solely for me. "You are confused. This section is for the VIPs. You know, the people who actually contributed to the cost of this evening, the people who matter." I looked at her, keeping my face perfectly neutral. "Where would you like me to sit, Mom?" She tapped a long manicured fingernail on the bottom corner of the chart, almost off the page entirely. "We put you at table 19. It is back there by the kitchen swing doors. We thought you would be more comfortable there. It is where we put the nannies, the distant cousins we only invite out of obligation, and the children. You fit right in." I followed her gaze. Table 19 was tucked into a dark corner obscured by a large decorative fern. While the other tables had plush velvet chairs, table 19 had folding wooden chairs that looked like they had been dragged out of a storage closet. "Of course," I said softly. "Thank you for including me at all." I saw a flicker of annoyance in her eyes. She wanted me to fight back. She wanted me to cause a scene so she could kick me out and play the victim, but I denied her that satisfaction. I simply adjusted my jacket and walked toward the back of the room. As I navigated through the tables, I could feel the eyes of my relatives on me. They whispered behind their hands, their gazes heavy with judgment. I heard snippets of their conversations. "That is Ava. Poor thing. Still single. I heard she lives in a studio apartment. Such a shame compared to Bella." I reached table 19 and took my seat. To my left was a 19-year-old nanny who was desperately trying to feed mashed potatoes to a screaming toddler. To my right was my great-aunt Marge, a woman who had not spoken a coherent sentence since the late 90s and was currently trying to eat a dinner roll with a spoon. The indignity of it was calculated. My mother wanted me to feel small. She wanted to remind me that in the hierarchy of this family, I was lower than the hired help. The nanny looked at me with sympathetic eyes. "Sorry about the noise," she whispered, wiping food off her dress. They ran out of seats at the main tables. "It is fine," I replied, unfolding my napkin. It was polyester, not the linen used at the VIP tables. I noticed these details. I noticed that our wine glasses were smaller. I noticed that while the waiters were pouring Dom Perignon at the front of the room, the bottle placed on our table was a cheap, sparkling wine that retailed for $8. I poured myself a glass of the cheap wine and took a sip. It was acidic and overly sweet, but I drank it without a grimace. I watched the head table, the so-called VIP table, bathed in the warm glow of a spotlight. Bella sat in the center, looking like a queen on a throne. She was laughing loudly, throwing her head back so the light would catch the diamond necklace she was wearing. I knew for a fact the diamonds were lab-grown, but she wore them with the arrogance of the crown jewels. Marcus sat next to her, his arm draped possessively over the back of her chair. He was red-faced, already drunk on the expensive champagne he thought he was paying for. The room quieted down as Bella stood up. She tapped a silver spoon against her crystal glass, the sharp sound cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. "Attention, everyone!" Bella announced, her voice amplified by a microphone she held a little too close to her mouth. "If I could have everyone's eyes up here for a moment." The guests turned toward her. My mother looked at Bella with tears of pride welling in her eyes, the complete opposite of the cold glare she had given me minutes ago. I just want to say how happy I am to see everyone here to celebrate Mom and Dad." Bella continued placing a hand on her heart. 30 years is a long time. And for such a special occasion, we knew we had to do something big. We couldn't just have a backyard barbecue, not for Linda and Robert. She paused for effect, waiting for the applause to ripple through the room. "That is why," she said, gesturing grandly to the vaulted ceiling, to the marble floors, to the ocean view, visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows. "That is why Marcus and I decided to rent out the Azure Coast for the entire weekend." A collective gasp went through the room. I took another sip of my cheap wine, watching the performance with clinical detachment. "We know it was expensive," Bella said with a humble shrug that was anything but humble. "I mean, renting $1 million villa isn't something people do every day." But Marcus insisted. He said, "Nothing is too good for your parents, Bella." He worked so hard pulling extra shifts, closing massive deals, just to make sure we could give Mom and Dad the luxury they deserve. The room erupted in applause. My mother stood up and hugged Marcus, wiping a tear from her cheek. My father shook Marcus's hand vigorously, looking at him with the admiration he had never shown me. "Thank you, Marcus," someone shouted from the back. "You are a good man," another voice cried out. Marcus stood up, waving to the crowd like a politician. Thank you," he said, basking in the adoration. It was nothing, really. When you reach a certain level of success, you realize that money is just a tool to make your loved ones happy. I am just glad I could provide this experience. I know not everyone in the family has the means to even step foot in a place like this, let alone rent it. His eyes flickered toward the back of the room, toward the darkness, toward table 19. He didn't say my name, but he didn't have to. The entire room shifted slightly, heads turning to look at the corner where I sat between the nanny and the senile aunt. The implication hung heavy in the air. Marcus was the provider, the savior, the success story. I was the charity case, the failure, the one who could only experience this level of wealth because of his generosity. Bella took the microphone back. "Yes, exactly. We are just so blessed, and we wanted to share that blessing. So please drink the champagne, eat the lobster, and enjoy the night. It is all on us." The applause thunderclapped again, louder this time. Bella raised her glass in a toast. "To family," she screamed. "To family," the crowd roared back. I did not raise my glass. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded in my lap. The lie was so bold, so audacious, that it was almost impressive. They were standing in my house, drinking my wine, eating food prepared by my chefs, and taking credit for every single ounce of it. Marcus had not paid a dime. He had paid a deposit for the catering staff, a few $1,000s at most, and he had convinced himself that this small contribution equated to ownership of the entire event. I looked at the invoice on my phone, the one I had approved last week. The total cost of the venue, the security, the private chefs, and the decor came to just over $250,000. I had paid it from a private trust listed simply as anonymous donor, so the resort manager wouldn't ask questions. Bella and Marcus were accepting praise for spending $250,000 they did not have. The injustice of it burned, but it was a cold burn like dry ice against skin. It didn't make me want to scream. It made me want to execute. I looked at my mother, who was now parading around the VIP table, showing off her ring to a jealous neighbor. I looked at Marcus, who was refilling his glass with the vintage Dom Perignon I had hand-selected from my private cellar in France. I looked at Bella, preening in her rental dress, believing she was the queen of the Hamptons. They were so loud, so confident, so incredibly stupid. I unlocked my phone. The screen glowed softly in the dim light of the corner table. I opened my secure messaging app and found the contact labeled House Manager. I typed a single line. Prepare the special gift. I watched the 3 dots dance on the screen as the butler who was standing invisibly in the shadows of the service entrance typed his reply. Immediately, madam. Should we initiate the sequence now? I looked up one last time. Bella was laughing at something Marcus whispered in her ear, likely another joke at my expense. I looked back at my phone and typed, yes, do it now, and make sure the projector is ready. I set the phone down on the table right next to the plastic sippy cup the toddler had thrown. I picked up my fork and took a bite of the cold, rubbery chicken that had been served to the children's table. It tasted like ash, but I chewed it slowly. Enjoy your moment in the sun, Bella. I thought my internal voice echoing with an eerie calm. Because the sun is about to set, and you have no idea how cold it is going to get. The waiters had just finished clearing the salad plates, or rather the plastic bowls, that had been set at the children's table when the room grew quiet again. The energy shifted from general chatter to a focused, almost hungry anticipation. It was time for the presentation of gifts. In my family, gift-giving was never about affection. It was a blood sport. It was about who could spend the most, who could flash the brightest logo, and who could garner the loudest applause. Marcus stood up once more, buttoning his jacket with an air of self-importance that was almost comical, given the poor fit of the polyester blend. He signaled to Bella, who reached under the table and pulled out a large, glossy folder tied with a gold ribbon. It looked like something a game show host would hold. Marcus cleared his throat, commanding the room's attention. He didn't just want to give a gift. He wanted to perform a miracle. Linda Robert, he began, his voice thick with false humility. Bella and I know that raising a family isn't easy. We know the sacrifices you made. And now that I am moving into a senior executive role and Bella is thriving in her career, we wanted to give you something you have always dreamed of, but never justified spending the money on. He untied the ribbon with a dramatic flourish and opened the folder. He pulled out a stack of brochures and fanned them out like a winning poker hand. "We are sending you to Europe," Marcus announced, beaming. 10 days, Paris, Rome, London, all expenses paid. The room erupted. My mother gasped, covering her mouth with her hands in a theatrical display of shock. My father stood up and clapped Marcus on the back, shaking his hand as if he had just brokered peace in the Middle East. "Oh my God," Bella screamed, clapping her hands. "You guys are going to see the Eiffel Tower." I sat perfectly still, my eyes narrowing slightly as I focused on the brochures Marcus was waving around. From my vantage point at the back of the room, I could see the logo printed on the bottom of the itinerary. It was a budget travel agency known for college backpacker tours and last-minute deals. I recognized the flight numbers listed on the front page. They were red-eye flights with 2 layovers likely connecting through obscure airports with 12-hour wait times. I squinted a little harder. The hotel listed for Paris was not in the city center. It was a 2-star motel near the airport, a good 40-minute train ride from anything resembling the Eiffel Tower. And knowing Marcus, he had likely put the entire package on a credit card with an interest rate that bordered on criminal. He was gifting them a headache wrapped in a debt trap, but to this room, he was a hero. "You are the son we never had," my mother cried out, hugging Marcus so tight I thought his cheap suit seams might burst. "This is incredible. A European tour. Finally, someone in this family knows how to treat us with respect." She pulled away from Marcus, her face flushed with victory, and then, as if on cue, her eyes locked onto me. The warmth instantly vanished from her expression, replaced by a cold, calculating sneer. The room followed her gaze. The applause died down, replaced by an awkward, heavy silence. The contrast was deliberate. She wanted to place Marcus's grand gesture right next to my perceived failure. "Well, Ava," my mother asked, her voice ringing out across the silent banquet hall. I slowly placed my fork down on the table. "Yes, Mom. Do not tell me you came empty-handed," she said, crossing her arms over her chest. "Marcus and Bella just gave us Europe. What did you bring? Or did you just bring that failed body of yours to fill a seat and eat free food?" A few cousins snickered. Bella smirked, taking a sip of her wine, enjoying the show. "I didn't bring a trip to Europe," I said calmly. My voice was steady, lacking the defensive tremor she was hoping for. "Of course you didn't," my mother scoffed. "You can barely afford your rent in the city, I'm sure. It is embarrassing, really. I told your father we shouldn't expect anything from you, but I had a sliver of hope that maybe, just maybe, you would have saved up a few dollars to show some gratitude." She walked towards my table, her heels clicking aggressively on the marble floor. She stopped right in front of me, looming over the folding chair. So she demanded, "What is it? A card? A gift certificate to a grocery store? Let's see it. Let's see what my other daughter thinks I am worth." I reached into the inner pocket of my blazer. The movement was slow, deliberate. I pulled out a single cream-colored envelope. It was small, understated, made of heavy linen paper with a wax seal on the back. It didn't have gold ribbons or glossy brochures. It was quiet. I held it out to her. "Happy anniversary, Mom. Dad." My mother snatched the envelope from my hand with a scoff. She weighed it in her palm, making a face of disgust at its lightness. "An envelope," she said flatly. She ripped it open, tearing the expensive linen without a second thought. She pulled out the single sheet of paper inside. It was a certified cashier's check, but before she could even look at the numbers, her eyes scanned the header text. "A donation," she shrieked, her voice cracking with incredulity. She looked up at me, her eyes bulging with rage. "You made a donation?" "In my name," I nodded. "I knew you always said you wanted to support the Children's Hospital wing where you had your surgery years ago. I thought it would be a meaningful legacy for the family." My mother let out a harsh, bitter laugh. "A legacy? I am not dead yet, Ava. I do not need a legacy. I need cash. I need things I can use. I need things I can show to my friends. Marcus gave me Paris, and you gave me a piece of paper that helps some sick kids I do not even know." She didn't even look at the amount line. If she had, she would have seen the number 5 followed by 5 zeros. $500,000. It was enough to name the entire new surgical wing after her. It was a tax write-off for me, yes, but it was a genuine fortune that would have garnered her press coverage, a plaque on the hospital wall, and invitations to galas for the rest of her life. But she was too blinded by greed to see it. She crumpled the check in her fist. "This is an insult," she spat. "You are so cheap, Ava. You use charity as an excuse to hide the fact that you have no money. You think this makes you look noble? It makes you look pathetic." She threw the crumpled ball of paper back at me. It bounced off my chest and landed on the floor right next to the nanny's diaper bag. "I do not want your fake charity," she hissed. "Keep your pennies. Marcus is the only one who understands the value of money in this family." I looked down at the crumpled paper on the floor. $500,000 discarded like a gum wrapper. I looked back up at her, my face a mask of eerie calm. "Are you sure, Mom?" I asked softly. "Once you refuse a gift like that, you can't take it back." "I am sure," she yelled, turning her back on me. "Take it and get out of my sight. You are ruining the mood." She marched back to the head table where Marcus and Bella were waiting to comfort her. "I cannot believe her," I heard Bella say loudly. "Who gives a donation as an anniversary gift, narcissist?" I bent down and picked up the check. I smoothed out the wrinkles on the edge of the table. The ink was still crisp. $500,000. I folded it neatly and put it back in my pocket. "Very well," I whispered to myself. I pulled out my phone and sent a quick text to my accountant. "Cancel the check for the Linda Miller Endowment. Redirect the funds to the Animal Rescue League." "Done." The reply came 3 seconds later. I took a sip of the warm, cheap, sparkling wine. My mother had just thrown away $500,000 and a chance at immortality in the city's history books, all for a budget trip to Europe that would likely leave her with jet lag and bedbug bites. The irony was delicious. But the night was far from over. Marcus was still preening, unaware that the credit card he used to book that trip had just triggered a fraud alert that I, as the majority shareholder of the issuing bank, could see flashing on my dashboard. He thought he had won this round. He had no idea he was playing a game he had already lost. The main course arrived with a synchronized flourish that only money could buy. At the VIP table, waiters in white gloves placed down steaming plates of filet mignon, drizzled with a truffle reduction that smelled earthy and expensive. At my table, the servers dropped plates of rubbery chicken breast and overcooked asparagus with the indifference of cafeteria workers. The contrast was so stark it was almost funny. I cut into my dry chicken, watching the juices run clear and flavorless, while my mother at the head table loudly exclaimed that the steak was the best she had ever tasted. The clinking of silverware against fine china created a rhythmic backdrop for the evening's main entertainment, which was, of course, Marcus. He had loosened his tie slightly, the alcohol flushing his cheeks a deep crimson. He wasn't just eating dinner. He was holding court. He gestured with his steak knife, pointing it at my father to emphasize his words. "You know, Robert, this trip to Europe is really just the beginning," Marcus boomed, his voice carrying easily to the back of the room. "I did not want to say anything until the ink was dry, but big things are happening at the firm. Massive things." The table went quiet. Even the toddler next to me stopped banging his spoon. "We are in the final stages of a merger," Marcus announced, leaning back in his chair with a smug grin. "The Olympus Group is acquiring us." I paused my fork, hovering halfway to my mouth. The Olympus Group. It took every ounce of my self-control not to laugh out loud. The Olympus Group was not just some faceless conglomerate. It was the parent company of the private equity firm I founded. It was the massive umbrella corporation that my husband Julian and I controlled. We had initiated the acquisition of Marcus's mid-sized marketing firm 3 weeks ago. I remembered reading the due diligence report on his company. It was a disaster. Bloated middle management, declining revenue, and a culture of nepotism. We bought it for parts. We bought it to strip it down, salvage the client list, and discard the rest. But Marcus didn't know that. Marcus thought he was being called up to the major leagues. The Olympus Group. My father asked, his eyes widening. "Isn't that the company that owns half of Manhattan?" The very same Marcus said, taking a long swig of his wine. "They are titans. And here is the best part. The transition team has been looking at our personnel files, and word on the street is that the big boss over at Olympus, the chairman himself, has taken a personal interest in my department." I slowly lowered my fork. This was getting better by the second. Julian had indeed taken a personal interest in the marketing department. Specifically, he had circled it in red ink on the restructuring plan with the note that said, "Liquidate immediately." They recognize talent. Marcus continued, puffed up like a peacock. "I have been told that once the merger goes through next week, I am looking at a promotion. Vice President of Global Strategy, a corner office, a signing bonus that will make this party look like pocket change." My mother let out a squeal of delight. "Oh, Marcus, I knew it. I knew you were destined for greatness. Vice President. Imagine that, Bella. You will be the wife of a vice president." Bella beamed, resting her head on Marcus's shoulder. "I am so proud of you, honey. You deserve it. You work harder than anyone." "It is not just about hard work," Marcus said, looking around the room with a wise, philosophical expression. "It is about vision. The leadership at Olympus sees that I have vision. They need people like me to steer the ship. I expect I will be having lunch with the chairman within the month. We will probably be on a first-name basis soon." I took a sip of water to wash down the dry chicken. The level of delusion was staggering. Marcus wasn't going to be having lunch with the chairman. He was going to be escorted out of the building by security with a cardboard box of his personal belongings. Suddenly, the conversation shifted. My Uncle Hank, a kind but somewhat oblivious man who had been sitting quietly at the edge of the VIP table, turned in his chair and looked back at me. He had always been the only one in the family who treated me with a shred of decency, mostly because he was too old to understand the family politics. "What about you?" Ava Uncle Hank called out, his voice shaky but loud. "We have heard all about Marcus and his big promotion. What are you doing these days, still working with computers?" The room went silent. All eyes pivoted from the golden couple at the head table to the dark corner where I sat. My mother stiffened. She hated when the spotlight shifted away from her success story. I dabbed my mouth with the polyester napkin and prepared to answer. I was going to tell him the truth, or at least a version of it. I was going to say that business was good, that investments were yielding high returns. But before I could get a single word out, Bella cut in. "Oh, Uncle Hank, do not embarrass her," Bella said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. She waved her hand dismissively in my direction. "Ava is figuring things out." "Figuring things out?" Uncle Hank asked, confused. "Yes," Bella continued, leaning forward so everyone could hear. "She calls herself a consultant. But you know what that means in this economy. It means she picks up odd jobs here and there, freelance stuff, basically whatever scraps she can find to pay the rent." She turned to look at me, her eyes flashing with malice. "Isn't that right, Ava? It is like a gig economy thing, very unstable, no benefits, no future. That is why she couldn't afford a gift today. We have to be understanding. Not everyone has the drive to climb the corporate ladder like Marcus." My mother sighed loudly, a sound of profound disappointment. "It is true, Hank. We worry about her, of course. It is hard to watch one child soar so high while the other one flails, but we have made peace with it." Ava is just meant for a smaller life. Marcus chuckled, shaking his head. Hey, the world needs worker bees too, right? Not everyone can be a queen. If you ever need a reference, Ava, let me know. Once I am VP at Olympus, my word will carry a lot of weight. Maybe I can get you into the mailroom. It comes with dental. The table erupted in polite, condescending laughter. They looked at me with pity. The poor, struggling sister, the failure, the one who needed handouts. I felt a cold smile spread across my face. It was the smile of a predator watching prey walk into a trap. Actually, Bella, I said, my voice cutting through the laughter. It wasn't loud, but it had a distinct, sharp edge that made the room go quiet. I am not exactly a freelancer, I continued, leaning back in my folding chair and locking eyes with Marcus. My work is a bit more specialized than that. Oh, Marcus asked, raising an eyebrow. Do enlighten us. What is your specialty, data entry? Customer support. I specialize in waste management, I said calmly. Waste management. Bella crinkled her nose. You mean like garbage? In a manner of speaking, I replied, I work with very large corporations. When they become bloated, inefficient, or infected with incompetence, they call me. I come in, identify the rot, and remove it. I held Marcus's gaze. He looked confused, his fork suspended in midair. It is a dirty job, I added, taking a sip of my water. But someone has to do it. You would be surprised how much trash accumulates in high places. People who think they are untouchable. People who think they are visionaries when they are actually just liabilities. I paused, letting the words hang in the air. I clean them out, I said softly. I strip them of their influence, I expose their failures, and I ensure they can never damage the company again. It is actually quite lucrative. For a second, nobody spoke. The air in the room grew thick and uncomfortable. Marcus shifted in his seat, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. He didn't understand why, but the hair on the back of his arms stood up. My tone was too confident, too precise. It didn't sound like the rambling of an unemployed woman. It sounded like a threat. But then the moment passed. Bella let out a sharp, dismissive laugh, breaking the spell. Wow, she said, rolling her eyes. So you are a janitor. You could have just said that, Ava. There is no shame in cleaning toilets. We need people to clean up after us, I suppose. The tension broke. The family laughed again, relieved to categorize me back into the box of the loser sister. A corporate janitor, my mother exclaimed, shaking her head. Well, at least it is honest work. Just do not talk about trash at the dinner table, Ava. It is unappetizing. I picked up my fork again. I didn't correct them. I didn't need to. You are right, Mom, I said, staring at the side of Marcus's head. Talking about trash is unpleasant, but disposing of it. That is incredibly satisfying. I watched Marcus take another bite of his steak, completely unaware that he was chewing on his last meal as an employed man. He was so busy celebrating his imaginary promotion that he didn't hear the sound of the guillotine blade sliding up the track, hovering right above his neck. I checked my watch. The helicopter was due in 10 minutes. The janitor was about to start her shift, and the cleanup was going to be legendary. I excused myself from the table, needing a moment of silence away from the suffocating atmosphere of my mother's self-congratulatory laughter and Marcus's endless bragging. I walked toward the powder room, the heels of my shoes clicking softly on the polished corridor floor. The restroom at the Azure Coast was more like a private lounge lined with floor-to-ceiling mirrors and vanity stations stocked with designer perfumes. I turned on the gold-plated faucet and let the cold water run over my wrists, trying to wash away the feeling of disgust that had been clinging to me since I arrived. I stared at my reflection in the mirror. My face was calm, my posture perfect. I had trained myself to be unreadable, but inside I was calculating. I was running the numbers on how much debt Marcus was actually in versus how much he claimed to have. I was estimating the exact moment the credit card declination notification would hit his phone. Suddenly, the heavy door swung open and slammed shut. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. The scent of overly sweet, cheap vanilla perfume filled the small room instantly. Bella. She didn't use the restroom. She walked straight to the vanity next to mine, threw her clutch on the marble counter, and leaned in close to the mirror to inspect her heavy makeup. She reapplied a layer of bright red lipstick, smacking her lips together, before finally turning her gaze to me. "You know," she said, her voice echoing off the tiled walls, "you are killing the vibe out there." I dried my hands on a linen towel, taking my time. "I am just eating my dinner, Bella. I haven't said a word." "That is the problem," she snapped. "You sit there with that superior look on your face. You think you are better than us just because you live in the city and wear whatever this is." She reached out and flicked the lapel of my jacket. Her fingernail snagged slightly on the fabric. "It is so plain, Ava," she sneered. "It is boring. Just like you. You come here to our party drinking our wine, and you act like you are doing us a favor. Do you know how hard Marcus worked to pay for this?" I looked at her via the reflection in the mirror. I saw a woman who was terrified. Underneath the sequins and the spray tan, Bella was deeply insecure. She knew instinctively that something was wrong. She knew that Marcus's stories didn't add up, but she was too terrified to pull at the thread because the whole tapestry of her life would unravel. So she projected that fear onto me. "I am not judging you, Bella," I lied smoothly. "I am just observing." She laughed, a harsh, jagged sound. "Observing. Right. You are jealous. Just admit it. You are jealous that I have the life you wanted. You are jealous that I have the husband you thought you were going to marry." I turned to face her. The air in the room felt suddenly very small. "I do not want Marcus, Bella. I haven't wanted Marcus since the day he left." "Oh, please," she rolled her eyes. "You can lie to yourself, but do not lie to me. I see the way you look at him. You look at him like you cannot believe what you lost." She took a step closer, invading my personal space. She lowered her voice, dropping the loud, brash tone she used in public for a conspiratorial whisper. "Do you want to know a secret?" she asked. A nasty little smile played on her lips. I remained silent, but my lack of response only egged her on. "You always thought Marcus left you because Mom told him I was the better option, right? You thought it was just because I was prettier or more fun, or because I didn't spend all my time buried in books like you." She paused, savoring the moment. She wanted to hurt me. She wanted to see me break. "That helped, of course," she continued. "But that wasn't the real reason. Marcus was on the fence. He actually felt bad for you. Can you believe that? He pitied you?" She leaned in closer, her breath smelling of wine. "So, I gave him a little push," she whispered. "I told him about the abortion." The room went dead silent. The only sound was the hum of the ventilation system. I froze. My blood turned to ice in my veins. What I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Bella smirked, checking her reflection again. "Oh, do not look so shocked. I told him you got pregnant a year into your relationship. And I told him you got rid of it because you cared more about your precious career than you did about starting a family with him." I stared at her, my mind racing. I had never been pregnant. Not once. "You lied," I said. The words felt heavy like stones in my mouth. Obviously, she shrugged, adjusting a strap on her dress. "But Marcus, he is old-fashioned. He wants a dynasty. The idea that you would kill his heir just to focus on your little job, it disgusted him. He told me he couldn't look at you the same way after that. He said a woman who destroys family isn't a woman he can build a life with. So he chose me, the nurturer, the one who values family." She let out a giggle. "And the best part, he never asked you about it because he didn't want to embarrass you. He just left. And you never knew why." She patted my cheek, a gesture so patronizing it took every ounce of my willpower not to slap her hand away. "So stop looking down on us, Ava. You lost him because I played the game better than you. I did what I had to do to win. And now look at me. I am the wife of a vice president, and you are just the cold, career-obsessed spinster I painted you to be." She turned back to the mirror, fluffing her hair. "Now fix your face. You look pale. We are going to cut the cake soon, and I want you smiling in the pictures." She grabbed her clutch and strutted out of the restroom, leaving me alone in the silence. I stood there for a long time, staring at the closed door. For the last hour, this had been about business. It had been about money. It had been about teaching arrogant people a lesson in humility. I was going to ruin their credit scores, embarrass them in front of their friends, and leave them to clean up the financial mess. That was the plan. It was a severe punishment, but it was just business. But this was different. Bella hadn't just stolen a boyfriend, she had assassinated my character. She had invented a trauma I never experienced and used it to manipulate a man into despising me. She had painted me as a monster to secure her own ring. She had built her entire marriage, her entire life, on a foundation of a lie so vicious it made my stomach turn. And Marcus. He had believed it without a single question. He hadn't given me the courtesy of a conversation. He had judged me, condemned me, and discarded me based on a fabrication, all while claiming to be a man of high moral standing. The eerie calm that had protected me all night began to shift. It hardened. It crystallized into something sharper, darker, and infinitely more dangerous. My hands, which had been resting on the marble countertop, curled into fists. My knuckles turned white. I looked at myself in the mirror again. The woman staring back at me was no longer just a CEO teaching a lesson. She was an executioner. They didn't just deserve to be poor, they deserved to be obliterated. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. My fingers moved across the screen with lethal precision. I pulled up the contact for my lead attorney, a man named Sterling, who was known in legal circles as the Shark. I typed a new message, change of plans. I didn't stop there. I opened the file labeled Bella Miller Investigation. I had kept it sealed thinking I wouldn't need to use the nuclear option. It contained the logs of her influencer fraud, the fake bot accounts she bought, and the cease and desist letters she had hidden from Marcus. I forwarded the entire file to the legal team representing the brands she worked with. Then I opened the file for Marcus. I authorized the release of the internal audit immediately. I didn't want him just fired. I wanted him prosecuted. I wanted his name so toxic that no company in America would hire him to sweep their floors. I put the phone back in my pocket. Bella wanted a reaction. She wanted to see me broken by the truth. She thought that by revealing her victory, she had put me in my place. She had no idea what she had just done. She had poked a sleeping dragon and laughed about it. I took a deep breath, smoothing the front of my jacket. I checked my lipstick. It was perfect. I walked toward the door. "You want a show, Bella?" I whispered to the empty room. "I will give you a show." I pushed the door open and stepped back out into the hallway. The sound of the party drifted toward me. Laughter, clinking glasses, the sounds of people celebrating a life built on lies. I walked back toward the ballroom, but this time I didn't head for the shadows of table 19. I walked with my head high, my eyes scanning the room for the arrival of the helicopter. The game had changed. I wasn't playing for checkmate anymore. I was playing to burn the board. The waiters were clearing the dessert plates, scraping the remnants of the store-bought cake into bins, when my mother decided it was time for her grand finale. Throughout the evening, she had thrown small jabs at me, little insults disguised as maternal concern, but I could tell she was building up to something. She signaled to the DJ to cut the music. The soft jazz faded into silence, leaving only the sound of the ocean crashing against the cliffs outside. My mother stood up from the head table. She didn't just stand. She ascended. She smoothed her skirt and walked to the center of the stage where a microphone stand had been set up. She gripped the mic with both hands, her knuckles white, her eyes scanning the room to ensure she had everyone's absolute attention. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice trembling with staged emotion. "Seeing everyone here in this magnificent villa that my wonderful daughter Bella and her husband Marcus provided, it has made me reflect on the future." She paused, looking lovingly at Bella and Marcus, who were holding hands like a prom king and queen. 30 years is a long time, she continued. And as Robert and I get older, we have to think about what we leave behind. We have to think about our legacy. We have to ensure that the fruits of our labor go to the people who can actually grow them. The room was silent. I sat in the back, my hands folded on the table. I knew exactly where this was going. My mother had been threatening to rewrite her will for years, using it as a weapon to control us. If I didn't call enough, I was out. If Bella bought her a nice scarf, she was back in. It was a game of emotional musical chairs, and tonight she was about to stop the music. "So on this special night, I have an announcement to make," she said, her voice gaining strength. "I have decided to finalize our family trust and declare our inheritance early. I want everyone to know exactly where they stand, so there is no confusion when we are gone." She took a deep breath, clutching a piece of paper she had pulled from her bra. We have decided that the family home in Connecticut, along with our entire savings portfolio and my jewelry collection, will be bequeathed solely and in its entirety to Bella and Marcus." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Even the waiters stopped moving. Disinheriting a child, even one considered a black sheep, was a massive public statement. It was a declaration of war. I saw my Aunt Marge drop her spoon. I saw my cousins exchange wide-eyed glances. They all turned to look at me. My mother didn't stop there. She needed to justify her cruelty. She needed to paint herself as the pragmatic matriarch, making a hard choice for the good of the bloodline. "I know some of you might think this is harsh," she said, finally turning her gaze toward my dark corner. She squinted against the spotlight, trying to find my face. "But we have to be realistic. We have to look at the facts. Bella has built a life. She has a husband. She has a future. She is building a dynasty with Marcus. They have plans. They have stability." She let out a sigh, shaking her head, as if my existence was a burden she carried alone. "And then there is Ava," she said, saying my name like it was a diagnosis. "Ava is alone. She has no husband to care for her. She has no children to pass things down to. She is almost 30, and let's be honest, if it hasn't happened by now, it is likely not going to happen." The cruelty of her words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. She was stripping me of my value as a human being, reducing me to my marital status and my womb. Giving the inheritance to Ava would be a waste, my mother declared, her voice cold and final. It would just disappear. It would be a dead end. She has no future. She has no one to share it with. It would just be money spent on whatever it is single women do to fill the void. She looked back at Bella and smiled, her face transforming instantly back into the doting mother. "So we are giving it to the survivors, to the winners, to the people who actually have a life worth funding." The room erupted into a mix of applause and uncomfortable murmurs. Bella wiped a tear from her eye and blew a kiss to our mother. Marcus puffed out his chest, looking like he had just won the lottery. But the real reaction was the sound of pity. I could hear it all around me. "Poor Ava," someone whispered near the buffet. "That is brutal," another voice murmured. "But I guess Linda has a point. Without a husband, what does she really have?" "She is going to die alone," a cousin whispered. At least Bella made something of herself. I sat there listening to them write my obituary. They looked at me with sad doe eyes, thinking I was devastated. They thought I was sitting there counting the pennies I had just lost. They didn't know the truth. They didn't know that the family home in Connecticut was mortgaged to the hilt because my father had made bad investments in the 90s. They didn't know the roof needed $40,000 in repairs and the foundation was cracking. They didn't know that the entire savings portfolio my mother was bragging about amounted to less than $50,000, barely enough to cover a year of nursing home care. My mother had just disinherited me from a pile of debt and a crumbling house. But the insult wasn't financial. It was existential. She had stood in front of everyone I knew and declared that because I wasn't married to a man like Marcus, I was worthless. She had declared that my life was a dead end because I didn't have a ring on my finger. I looked up at the stage. My mother was beaming, soaking in the applause. And then I looked at Marcus. He was looking right at me. He caught my eye across the crowded room. The corners of his mouth twitched up into a smirk that was pure distilled arrogance. He reached for his glass of champagne, the expensive vintage I had paid for. He raised the glass in the air, pointing it directly at me. It was a toast, a challenge. He mouthed the words, "To the winner." He took a slow, deliberate sip, his eyes never leaving mine. He was reveling in it. He thought he had taken everything from me, first my boyfriend, then my mother's love, and now my inheritance. He thought he had buried me. I looked at him, and for the first time that night, I didn't feel the need to look away. I picked up my glass of cheap, flat, sparkling wine. I didn't raise it. I just held it. "You think you won, Marcus?" I thought, my internal voice sharp as a blade. "You think you just inherited a kingdom? You just inherited an anchor." My mother stepped away from the microphone, hugging Bella. The DJ started playing upbeat music again, trying to wash away the awkwardness. But the air had changed. The line had been drawn. I checked my watch. 3 minutes. 3 minutes until the sound of rotors would drown out this pathetic celebration. 3 minutes until the man they thought didn't exist would land on the front lawn and show them what a real dynasty looked like. I set my glass down. I didn't drink. I sat back and waited. The pity in the room was suffocating, but I let it wash over me. Let them feel sorry for me. Let them think I am the victim. It will make the look on their faces so much sweeter when they realize that while they were fighting over a crumbling house, I was buying the bank that owns it. The applause for my disinheritance was just dying down when Marcus raised his hand, signaling that he wasn't quite finished. He still had the microphone in one hand and his glass of my expensive champagne in the other. He looked like a man drunk on power, swaying slightly as he surveyed the room. The adrenaline of the moment had gone to his head, and he needed one final kill to cement his status as the alpha of the family. He turned his gaze toward me, his eyes gleaming with malicious intent. "Wait, everyone!" Marcus bellowed, his voice booming through the speakers. "I do not want to end on a sad note. We are a family that helps each other, right? And I do not want Ava to leave here thinking we do not care about her future." He took a step closer to the edge of the stage, looking down at me in my dark corner. "Since you mentioned earlier that you are in waste management," Marcus said, a cruel smirk playing on his lips, "I actually have a proposition for you. My new company, the one being acquired by Olympus, we are expanding our facilities, and big facilities mean big messes." He paused for comedic effect, waiting for the audience to lean in. "I am going to need a head of janitorial services," he announced, his voice dripping with mock generosity. "It is not glamorous, Ava. You will be scrubbing floors, emptying bins, maybe unclogging a toilet or two. But hey, it is a steady paycheck. Minimum wage plus overtime if you are willing to work weekends. You said you like cleaning up trash, right? Well, I am giving you the chance to do it for a winner." The room exploded into laughter. It wasn't just a chuckle this time. It was a roar. My cousins were slapping their knees. Bella was laughing so hard she had to hold onto the table for support. Even my mother covered her mouth to hide a smile, though her eyes were dancing with amusement. "I offer this to you because I am a benevolent guy," Marcus shouted over the laughter. "You do not have to thank me now. Just show up on Monday morning with a mop. I will even put in a good word with HR so they skip the background check. We wouldn't want them to find out about your lack of references." I sat there watching him. The humiliation was designed to break me. He wanted me to cry. He wanted me to storm out in a fit of rage so he could point his finger and say I was unstable. But I felt nothing but a cold, hard detachment. He was offering me a job cleaning the floors of a building I had purchased 3 days ago. He was offering minimum wage to a woman whose daily interest earnings exceeded his annual salary. I was about to stand up. I was about to end the charade right then and there. But then a sound cut through the laughter. It was a ringtone, not just any ringtone. It was the distinct piercing trill of Marcus's phone, amplified by the microphone he was still holding near his pocket. The room went quiet instantly. Marcus looked annoyed for a split second, reaching into his pocket to silence it. But when he pulled the phone out and looked at the screen, his face transformed. The annoyance vanished, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated awe. His eyes widened, and his jaw practically hit the floor. He held up a hand, silencing the room completely. "Oh my God," he whispered, but the microphone picked it up. "It is them. It is the headquarters." He looked at the crowd, his face flushed with excitement. "It is the executive office of the Olympus Group. They are calling me on a Saturday night." My mother gasped. "Answer it," she hissed. "Put it on speaker." Marcus, trembling with excitement, tapped the screen and held the phone up to the microphone. This was his moment. He wanted everyone to hear his glory. He wanted the entire family to witness his ascent into the corporate stratosphere. "Hello," Marcus said, his voice cracking slightly. "This is Marcus Miller." The voice that came through the speakers was cool, crisp, and professional. It was a woman's voice, one I recognized instantly. It was Sarah, the executive assistant to the chairman. I had hired her myself 5 years ago because she had nerves of steel and a voice that could freeze water. "Good evening, Mr. Miller," Sarah said. "I apologize for the interruption to your evening. I am calling from the office of Chairman Julian Blackwood." A collective gasp went through the room. The name Julian Blackwood was legendary in New York. He was the titan of industry, the man who moved markets with a whisper. To my family, he was a mythical figure, a god of wealth and power that they only read about in magazines. Marcus looked like he was about to faint. Yes, this is him. This is me." To what do I owe the honor? Chairman Blackwood has been reviewing the acquisition files personally this evening. Sarah continued, her tone unreadable. He has taken a particular interest in your profile, Mr. Miller. Marcus pumped his fist in the air, mouthing, "I told you to Bella." "Thank you," Marcus stammered. "I am honored. I have heard great things about the chairman." "Chairman Blackwood is currently in his helicopter," Sarah said. "He is en route to your location. He is approximately 5 minutes away. He wishes to meet with you and the key stakeholders of your branch immediately. He wants to see the caliber of the leadership team in person." The silence that followed was deafening. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. And then absolute pandemonium broke loose. Marcus let out a shriek that sounded more like a teenage girl than a future vice president. "He is coming here," Marcus screamed into the phone. "The chairman is coming here." "Now, yes," Sarah replied. "Please be ready to receive him. The helicopter will be landing on the south lawn." The line went dead. Marcus dropped the hand holding the phone, staring at the device as if it were a holy relic. Then reality hit him. The chairman of the Olympus Group, a billionaire, a titan, was coming to his party. "Oh my God," Marcus yelled, jumping off the stage. "Did you hear that Julian Blackwood is coming? He is coming to see me. He wants to meet the leadership. That means he is going to promote me on the spot." He started running around the room like a headless chicken, barking orders at everyone. "Clear the tables. Get the waiters to refill the champagne. Mom, fix your hair. Dad, stand up straight. Everyone look successful." My mother was hyperventilating. "Julian Blackwood," she gasped, fanning herself. "In my presence. Oh, Lord. Bella, check my makeup. Do I look rich? Do I look like the mother-in-law of a vice president?" Bella was frantically applying powder to her nose. "I cannot believe it," she squealed. "He probably wants to meet me too. He probably saw my pictures on social media." The room was a whirlwind of activity. Waiters were being shoved around. Cousins were tucking in their shirts. It was a desperate, pathetic scramble to present a facade of perfection to a man they feared and worshipped. In the middle of the chaos, Marcus stopped. He froze his eyes, scanning the room with a look of panic. His gaze landed on the dark corner where I sat. He stared at me, his face twisting into a mask of horror. "You..." He pointed a shaking finger at me. He marched over to my table, his face red with exertion. "Ava, you have to go," he hissed, grabbing my arm. "Excuse me," I asked, pulling my arm away. "You have to leave." "Now," Marcus shouted, not caring who heard him. "Look at you. You are wearing a cheap suit. You look depressed. You look like a failure. I cannot have the chairman of Olympus Group walk in here and see this." He gestured to me as if I were a stain on the carpet. "He is coming to meet the best," Marcus continued, his voice rising in hysteria. "He is coming to meet winners. If he sees you sitting here looking like a charity case, he might think we are related to losers. It reflects bad on me. It reflects bad on the brand." My mother rushed over, nodding frantically. "Marcus is right, Ava. You need to hide. You are not up to standard. We cannot risk Marcus's promotion just because you decided to dress like a bank teller today. But I am a guest," I said, my voice calm, almost amused. "Not anymore," Marcus snapped. "You are a liability. Get out. Use the back door through the kitchen. Do not let him see you. Go wait in your car. Go home. I do not care. Just disappear." He looked around, grabbing the arm of a passing waiter. "You escort this woman to the service exit. Make sure she leaves the premises. If the chairman sees her, you are fired." The waiter looked at me apologetically. "Miss, please. I do not want any trouble." I stood up slowly. I adjusted my jacket. I picked up my clutch. I looked at Marcus, who was wiping sweat from his forehead, his eyes darting toward the windows, searching for the helicopter. "You are kicking me out," I asked softly. "Because you are afraid I will embarrass you in front of Julian Blackwood." "Yes," Marcus screamed. "Are you deaf? Go. He is a man of class, Ava, a man of taste. He doesn't want to see someone like you." I smiled. It was a genuine smile this time, a smile that reached my eyes. "Okay, Marcus," I said. "I will go to the back. I wouldn't want to ruin your big moment." I turned and walked toward the kitchen doors. "Good riddance," my mother shouted after me. "And take your bad energy with you." I walked through the swinging doors into the bustling kitchen. The chefs were shouting, preparing fresh hors d'oeuvres for the VIP arrival. I walked past them, past the dishwashing station, and out the back service door into the cool night air. I walked around the side of the building toward the south lawn. I could hear it now, the thumping rhythm of rotor blades cutting through the air. The sound was getting louder, closer. The wind began to pick up, whipping the trees around the villa. I stood in the shadows just outside the circle of light cast by the patio lanterns. Inside, Marcus and my family were lining up like soldiers, trembling with anticipation, ready to bow down to their new god. They thought they were about to meet their savior. They thought they were about to be elevated. They had kicked me out the back door so I wouldn't be seen by Julian Blackwood. I checked my watch one last time. The helicopter descended its searchlight, sweeping across the lawn, illuminating the terrified, hopeful faces of my family through the glass windows. I stepped out of the shadows and began to walk toward the landing zone. They told me to disappear. Instead, I was about to introduce them to my husband. The roar of the helicopter blades was not just a sound. It was a physical force that shook the very foundations of the villa. The crystal chandeliers in the ballroom trembled, casting frantic, dancing shadows across the walls. Outside, the grass of the south lawn was being flattened by the downdraft of a twin-engine Sikorsky, a machine that cost more than the combined lifetime earnings of everyone in the room. I stood in the shadows of the terrace, watching the beast descend. It was painted a matte phantom black, with no registration numbers visible to the naked eye. It was a ghost in the sky, a predator landing in a nest of field mice. Inside the ballroom, the panic was palpable. Through the floor-to-ceiling glass windows, I watched my family scrambling. The arrogance that had filled the room only moments ago had evaporated, replaced by a frantic, sweaty desperation to please. Marcus was shouting orders, his voice cracking with hysteria. "Line up! Everyone! Line up!" he screamed, shoving my father into a straight line near the double doors. "Mom, stop fidgeting. Bella, stand up straight. He is coming." They arranged themselves like servants in a period drama, forming a receiving line that stretched from the entrance toward the center of the room. My mother was hyperventilating, clutching her pearls as if they were a rosary. Bella was frantically smoothing her dress, checking her reflection in the glass of a picture frame. Marcus stood at the head of the line, the self-appointed captain of this sinking ship. He was sweating profusely, the moisture causing his cheap foundation to streak. He adjusted his tie for the 10th time, pulling the knot so tight I was surprised he didn't pass out. I watched them with a cold, detached amusement. They looked like children playing dress-up, terrified that the principal had walked in. They had no idea that the man descending from the sky wasn't coming to promote them. He was coming to collect me. The helicopter touched down the landing gear, sinking slightly into the soft turf. The engines began to wind down, transitioning from a deafening roar to a high-pitched whine. The side door of the aircraft slid open. The first people to exit were not Julian. They were the advance team. 4 men in tactical suits wearing earpieces and dark sunglasses despite the darkness of the night. They moved with the lethal precision of a special ops unit. They didn't walk. They flowed across the grass, scanning the perimeter, checking for threats. They burst through the double doors of the ballroom, causing my mother to let out a small shriek of terror. Clear the lane, one of the guards barked his voice, leaving no room for argument. Marcus jumped back, nearly tripping over his own feet. Of course, we are ready, we are honored." The guards ignored him. They took up positions at the 4 corners of the room, standing with their hands clasped in front of them, staring straight ahead. They were statues carved from granite, their presence alone sucking the oxygen out of the room. Then a silence fell over the villa. It was heavy and absolute. Even the ocean seemed to hold its breath. From the darkness of the helicopter cabin, a figure emerged, Julian. He stepped onto the grass, buttoning his jacket with a casual, fluid motion. He didn't look like a businessman. He looked like a monarch who had grown bored of his kingdom. He was wearing a suit cut from midnight blue vicuna wool, tailored in Naples by a man who only made 10 suits a year. The fit was razor-sharp, accentuating the breadth of his shoulders and the lean power of his frame. He wore no tie, the top button of his crisp white shirt undone, revealing just a hint of skin. It was a look of calculated nonchalance, the style of a man who didn't need to try because he already owned everything in sight. He walked toward the house, his strides long and purposeful. He didn't look left or right. His gaze was fixed straight ahead, intense and unreadable. I slipped quietly back through the side door, positioning myself in the shadows near the back of the room, close to the table where I had been exiled. I wanted to see this up close. As Julian stepped through the main doors, the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. His presence was overwhelming. It wasn't just money, it was authority. It was the kind of power that could shift stock markets and topple governments. Marcus took a deep breath, puffed out his chest, and stepped forward. This was his moment. He had rehearsed this speech in his head 1,000 times in the last 5 minutes. "Mr. Blackwood," Marcus announced, his voice trembling with reverence. He bowed low, a clumsy, awkward gesture that looked more like a spasm than a sign of respect. "Welcome to our humble gathering," Marcus continued, rising from his bow with a sycophantic smile plastered across his face. "I am Marcus Miller, the future vice president you spoke of. It is the greatest honor of my life to welcome you here. My team and I are ready to serve." Marcus extended his hand, waiting for the handshake that would seal his destiny. He stood there, hand outstretched, eyes wide with hope. Julian didn't even blink. He didn't slow down. He didn't look at Marcus. He didn't look at Marcus's extended hand. He didn't look at my mother, who was curtsying so low her knees were cracking. He didn't look at Bella, who was flashing her most seductive smile. Julian walked past Marcus as if he were made of air. It was a snub, so brutal, so absolute that I heard a collective intake of breath from the room. Marcus froze, his hand still hanging in the empty space where Julian had been a second ago. His smile faltered, twitching at the corners as confusion washed over him. Julian continued walking. His Italian leather shoes made a sharp, rhythmic clicking sound on the marble floor. Click, click, click. He walked past the VIP table, ignoring the expensive floral arrangements and the half-eaten steaks. He walked past the guests, who parted like the Red Sea, terrified to even make eye contact with him. He was heading straight for the back of the room. My mother turned her head, her eyes widening in horror. "Where is he going?" she whispered to my father. "Why isn't he stopping?" "That is the service area." Marcus spun around, his face pale. "Mr. Blackwood, sir, the VIP table is this way. You are going the wrong way. That is just the children's section." Julian kept walking. He navigated through the maze of round tables, moving deeper into the shadows where the lighting was dim and the furniture was cheap. He stopped, right in front of table 19. The table with the folding chairs, the table with the plastic cups and the sleeping toddler. The table where I was standing, leaning against the wall with my arms crossed. The entire room turned to look. They were baffled. Why would the chairman of the Olympus Group, a man who dined with presidents and royalty, walk past a banquet of lobster and champagne to stand in front of a rickety table in the corner? Marcus ran up behind him, breathless and frantic. "Sir, please," Marcus pleaded, reaching out as if to guide him back to the light. "There must be a mistake. This is the overflow seating. It is just... Nobody's back here. The leadership team is at the front." Julian stopped. Slowly, terrifyingly slowly, he turned around. He didn't turn his whole body. He just turned his head, looking over his shoulder at Marcus. His eyes were the color of steel, cold and hard. He looked at Marcus not with anger, but with the mild annoyance one might feel toward a buzzing fly. "I am not here for the leadership team," Julian said. His voice was low, a rich baritone that carried to every corner of the silent room without the need for a microphone. He turned back, facing the empty chair where I had been sitting. He looked at the polyester napkin. He looked at the cheap glass of flat, sparkling wine. He reached out and touched the back of the folding chair, his fingers brushing against the rough wood. Then he looked up. His eyes locked onto mine. The coldness vanished from his face instantly. The steel in his eyes melted, replaced by a warmth that was reserved for only one person in the world. The hard line of his jaw softened. He took a step toward me, closing the distance between us. The room watched in stunned silence as the most powerful man in New York walked past the people who were desperate for his attention, only to stop in front of the woman they had tried to erase. Marcus stood frozen in the middle of the room, his mouth hanging open, his hand still twitching. He looked from Julian to me and back to Julian, his brain unable to process the data. Julian ignored him. He ignored them all. In that massive crowded ballroom, amidst the millions of dollars of perceived wealth and the layers of desperate social climbing, he only saw me. He stopped just inches from me. I could smell his cologne, a custom blend of sandalwood and sea salt that calmed my racing heart. He looked down at me, scanning my face for any sign of distress. "You are late," I whispered, breaking the silence. "Traffic was murder," he replied softly, a small, playful smile touching his lips. The sound of his voice, speaking to me with such intimacy, such familiarity, hit the room like a bomb. My mother clutched her chest, Bella dropped her clutch, and Marcus looked like he had just seen a ghost that was about to drag him straight to hell. The silence in the ballroom was absolute. It was a vacuum sucking the air out of the lungs of everyone present. Julian stood before me, his back to the room, creating a private world that only he and I inhabited. For the first time all evening, the suffocating weight of my family's judgment vanished, replaced by the protective aura of the man I loved. My mother, however, could not read the room. Her narcissism was a blinding force that distorted reality. She saw the chairman of the Olympus Group standing near her daughter, the family disappointment, and her brain short-circuited. She assumed I was bothering him. She assumed I was begging for a handout or trying to embarrass the family by speaking to a man so clearly out of my league. She took a frantic step forward, her heels clacking loudly on the marble. "Ava!" She hissed, her voice sharp and panicked. "Get away from him! Do not bother Mr. Blackwood!" She turned to Julian, her face contorting into a desperate, apologetic smile. "Mr. Blackwood, please forgive her. My daughter she is not quite right. She doesn't know her place. Please, just ignore her. Come this way, the VIP table is waiting." Julian did not turn around. He did not acknowledge her existence. It was as if a gnat had buzzed in his ear, annoying but unworthy of a swat. Instead, he did something that made my mother's jaw drop. He looked down at my feet. He frowned slightly, noticing something that no one else had bothered to see. He slowly bent his knees. The room gasped. A collective audible intake of breath swept through the crowd like a wave. The chairman of the Olympus Group, a man who controlled shipping lanes and tech conglomerates, a man whose net worth was higher than the GDP of some small countries, was lowering himself to the floor. He went down on one knee in front of me. He reached out with his hand, the one wearing a platinum wedding band, and gently touched the strap of my heel. "Your strap is loose," he said softly, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in my chest. "You have been standing too long. I told you not to wear these if you were going to be on your feet all night." He carefully adjusted the buckle, his fingers warm against my skin. The intimacy of the gesture was shattering. In a room full of people posturing for power, the most powerful man there was serving me. He wasn't trying to dominate. He was submitting to my comfort. He finished adjusting the shoe and looked up at me. His eyes, usually so cold and guarded when dealing with the business world, were filled with a fierce, protective adoration. He took my hand in his. He brought it to his lips and kissed my knuckles, lingering for a moment. "I am sorry I am late, my love," he whispered. The shareholder meeting in Tokyo ran over. They tried to stall on the acquisition vote. I had to remind them who actually owns the majority shares. I looked down at him, feeling the warmth of his hand anchoring me. I felt the shock waves radiating from my family behind him. I didn't need to look at them to know that my mother was currently gripping the edge of a table to keep from fainting. "It is okay," I said, my voice calm and steady. I kept myself entertained. Julian stood up, rising to his full height. He towered over me, a pillar of strength in a midnight blue suit. He reached out and tucked a stray strand of hair behind my ear, his thumb grazing my cheekbone. "Did they treat you well?" he asked, his eyes scanning my face. "Did they give you the seat of honor?" I let out a small, soft laugh. It was the only sound in the room. "Well," I said, tilting my head toward the folding chair behind me. I got a front row seat to the kitchen, and the wine was interesting. Julian's eyes narrowed slightly. He glanced at the cheap bottle of sparkling wine on the table, then at the plastic cup. A muscle in his jaw twitched. "I see," he said, his tone dropping a few degrees. But the night wasn't a total loss. I continued smoothing the lapel of his jacket. I actually got a job offer. Julian raised an eyebrow. A job offer? You, yes. I nodded. Marcus was very generous. He said that since his company is being acquired by Olympus, he is going to need new staff. Julian looked confused, but he played along, sensing the trap I was setting. Is that so? Julian asked. And what position did he offer you? Did he want you to run the financial audit? Did he want you to lead the restructuring team? I smiled, a slow, dangerous smile. No, not exactly. He offered me a position in sanitation. Sanitation. Julian repeated the word, tasting foreign in his mouth. Janitorial services, I clarified. He said I could scrub the floors of the new headquarters. He even offered to pay me minimum wage. He said if I worked hard, I might be able to unclog a few toilets for the winners. The air in the room didn't just freeze, it solidified. Julian stood perfectly still for a second. Then he slowly turned around. The tenderness was gone. The loving husband had vanished. In his place stood the shark of Wall Street, the man who had destroyed competitors for looking at him the wrong way. He fixed his gaze on Marcus. Marcus was standing 10 feet away, trembling so violently that the champagne in his glass was splashing over the rim. His face was a mask of sheer terror. He looked like a man who had just realized he was standing on a landmine and had already lifted his foot. Julian took a step toward him. You offered her a job as a janitor, Julian asked. His voice was not loud. It was terrifyingly quiet. It was the sound of a judge delivering a death sentence. Marcus opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He squeaked a pathetic, high-pitched noise. Sir, I didn't know. You didn't know. Julian cut him off. You didn't know that you were speaking to my wife. My mother let out a strangled cry. Wife. Julian ignored her. He kept his eyes locked on Marcus, dissecting him with his stare. You offered a minimum wage cleaning job to Ava Blackwood. Julian continued, taking another step forward. He gestured to me with an open hand. You offered a mop to the woman who owns 51% of the Olympus Group. The revelation hit the room like a physical blow. Bella gasped so loud she started coughing. My father grabbed a chair to steady himself. 51%! Marcus whispered, his knees buckling. Yes, Julian said, his voice dripping with venom. You offered a janitorial position to the vice chairman of the board. The woman who signed your acquisition papers this morning. The woman who holds the power to dissolve your entire department with a single text message. Julian stopped right in front of Marcus. He loomed over him, his presence suffocating. You told my wife she was lucky to get a job scrubbing floors in a building she owns. Marcus dropped his glass. It shattered on the marble floor, the sound echoing like a gunshot. Champagne splashed onto his cheap shoes. I thought she said she was a consultant. Marcus stammered, tears welling in his eyes. She is a consultant, Julian said coldly. She consults me on which companies are worth keeping and which ones are garbage. And judging by your performance tonight, Marcus, I think she has already made her decision about you. Julian turned back to me, extending his hand. Come, my love, he said, his voice softening again. The helicopter is waiting. I think we have seen enough here. I walked past the stunned faces of my family. I walked past my mother, who looked like she had aged 10 years in 10 seconds. I walked past Bella, who was staring at me with a mix of hatred and horror. I took my husband's hand. But we weren't done yet. The collapse was just beginning. The room did not just go silent, it went dead. It was the kind of silence usually reserved for funeral homes or the seconds immediately following a catastrophic car accident. The air was sucked out of the space, leaving a vacuum where only the hum of the air conditioning and the distant thumping of the helicopter rotors dared to exist. My mother Linda looked as though her blood had been drained by a siphon. Her face, usually flushed with the excitement of attention, had turned a color I can only describe as cadaver gray. She gripped the edge of the table so hard her knuckles were white, her perfectly manicured nails digging into the wood. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish on dry land, struggling to comprehend the words my husband had just spoken. Vice chairman, owner, wife. These words simply did not compute with the version of reality she had constructed for 30 years, a reality where I was the failure and she was the matriarch of a dynasty. Next to her, Bella stood frozen. The glass of red wine she had been holding, the expensive vintage I had paid for, slipped from her limp fingers. It didn't shatter. It hit the table first, tipping over and spilling a dark crimson river across the white tablecloth before cascading onto her dress. The neon pink ball gown, the one she had rented for thousands of dollars just to outshine me, was instantly ruined. The red stain bloomed across her lap like a gunshot wound soaking into the cheap sequins. She didn't even notice. She stared at Julian with wide, terrified eyes, her breath coming in short, shallow gasps. And Marcus. Marcus looked like a man who had been pushed out of an airplane without a parachute. He was shaking so violently that his knees were knocking together. He looked from Julian to me, his brain trying to reconcile the image of the janitor he had just mocked with the woman holding the hand of the most powerful man in New York. Wife Marcus stammered his voice, barely a squeak. He took a step back, nearly tripping over his own feet. Wife of the chairman. But that is impossible. He pointed a trembling finger at me. She is Ava, he insisted, his voice rising in pitch as panic set in. She is just Ava. She is unemployed. She told us she works in waste management. She drives a sedan. She wears old clothes. She cannot be who you say she is. He looked at Julian with pleading eyes, begging him to say it was a joke. Sir, please, you have been misinformed. She is a consultant, a freelancer. She has no money. She couldn't afford a gift for her parents. She gave them a fake check. She is a liar. I let go of Julian's hand. I didn't need him to fight this battle for me. He had opened the door, but I was the one who was going to walk through it and burn the house down. I stepped forward. The heels that Julian had so lovingly adjusted clicked sharply on the marble floor. I walked toward the stage, toward the spotlight that Marcus had been hogging all night. I am not a liar, Marcus, I said, my voice calm, projecting effortlessly to the back of the room. I told you the absolute truth. I walked up the stairs to the small stage. Marcus shrank back as I approached, terrified of me for the first time in his life. I reached out and took the microphone from his sweating hand. He let it go without a fight. I told you I work in waste management, I said, looking out at the sea of stunned faces. And I do. I specialize in acquiring distressed assets, identifying the toxic elements within them, and removing them to increase value. I turned to look at Marcus. And you, Marcus, are a toxic element. I pulled a folded document from the inside pocket of my blazer. It was the acquisition summary I had signed that morning. I did not just sign the acquisition papers for your company today, I continued. I orchestrated the entire buyout. I have been watching your performance for months. I saw the inflated expense reports. I saw the client complaints you buried. I saw the way you treat your subordinates. Marcus turned pale, sweat dripping down his nose. I could have fired you last week, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. I could have had security escort you out on Friday. But I decided to wait. I wanted to see you one last time. I wanted to see if the arrogance you showed in the boardroom matched the arrogance you showed to my family. I gestured to the room, to the decorations, to the ruined party. And you did not disappoint. You put on quite a show. You mocked me. You tried to humiliate me. You offered me a job cleaning my own building. I laughed a cold, humorless sound. The reason I haven't fired you yet wasn't because I was deciding. It was because I wanted to fire you in person. Julian stepped up beside me. He didn't need a microphone. His presence alone commanded absolute silence. He looked at Marcus with the kind of disdain a lion feels for a rat. You are fired, Marcus. Julian said, his voice hard as granite, effective immediately. Your access to the building has already been revoked. Your company phone has been remotely wiped. Your company car has been reported as retrieved. Marcus fell to his knees. Please, sir, Mr. Blackwood. Ava, I have a mortgage. I have debt. Bella, we just spent everything on this party. You cannot do this. Oh, but we can, Julian replied. And we are not just firing you for incompetence, we are firing you for cause, gross violation of the company code of ethics, attempting to use your position to humiliate a member of the board. That means no severance package, no unemployment benefits, nothing. Julian turned his gaze to Bella, who was frantically dabbing at the wine stain on her dress with a napkin, tears streaming down her face, masking her mascara. And as for you, Bella, Julian said, Bella looked up startled. Me. But I didn't work for you. I didn't do anything. You did plenty, Julian said, his voice turning icy. My legal team has been briefed on the statements you made to my wife earlier this evening, specifically the lies you told regarding a medical procedure she never had. Bella stopped breathing. The color drained from her face completely as she realized the conversation in the bathroom had not stayed in the bathroom. That is defamation of character, Julian stated. It is slander. And when you use that slander to manipulate a third party into a marriage, it becomes fraud. Fraud, Bella whispered. Yes, Julian nodded. You damaged my wife's reputation to secure a financial advantage. You lied about her character to steal a relationship. In the world of business, we call that tortious interference. In the real world, we call it a lawsuit. Julian gestured toward the double doors at the entrance of the ballroom. My attorneys are waiting in the lobby, he said calmly. They have a cease and desist order for your social media accounts and a summons for a civil suit. We are suing you for damages, Bella. And considering the emotional distress you caused, we are going for everything. The rental car, the savings account, even the fake jewelry. Bella let out a wail of despair, collapsing into a chair. My mother rushed to her side, but she was looking at me with pure terror. She realized in that moment that she had bet on the wrong horse. She had thrown away the daughter who owned the bank to worship the daughter who was about to be bankrupt. Marcus crawled toward me, reaching for the hem of my pants. Ava, please, we are family. You can't let him do this. Tell him to stop. We were just joking. I stepped back, pulling my leg away from his touch. I am not family, Marcus, I said, echoing the words he had used against me so many times. I am just the janitor, and I am taking out the trash. Julian put his arm around my waist, shielding me from their desperation. We are done here, he said. We turned our backs on them. Behind us, the sound of weeping and begging filled the room, a symphony of regret that had come far too late. They had spent years building a tower of lies, and I had just pulled the bottom brick. The collapse was total, absolute, and incredibly satisfying. The security team did not handle Marcus with the gentle reverence he had demanded earlier that evening. 2 large men in tactical gear hoisted him up by his armpits, dragging him backward across the marble floor like a sack of unwanted laundry. His heels skidded uselessly on the polished stone, leaving scuff marks that he would never be able to afford to clean. He was screaming a high-pitched, desperate sound that echoed off the vaulted ceilings. He wasn't screaming for mercy anymore. He was screaming about numbers, my credit cards. Marcus wailed, his eyes bulging with panic. I put the deposit on the Europe trip. I put the down payment on the lease. If I lose this job, the bank will take everything. Ava, please. The interest rates. They are going to bury me. I watched him go with the same emotionless expression I would use to watch a sanitation truck pick up garbage on a Tuesday morning. He had spent the entire night bragging about a lifestyle funded by debt, assuming his future salary would cover the cracks. Now that future was gone. The cracks were turning into canyons, and he was falling straight into them. He would be lucky if he could find a job flipping burgers with a fraud flag on his personnel file. Near the table, Bella was having her own meltdown. Her phone, which she had glued to her hand all night to document her glamorous life, began to buzz incessantly. It wasn't likes or comments. It was notifications from her email. I watched as she tapped the screen, her mascara-stained face crumbling with every swipe. Oh my God, she whispered, her voice trembling. Fashion Nova just canceled my contract. Revolve just sent a termination notice. They are saying I violated the morality clause. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with betrayal. You did this, she hissed. You ruined my career. I am an influencer. My reputation is everything. Your reputation was built on a lie, I replied calmly. And now the truth has simply caught up with you. Good luck paying for that ruined dress, Bella. I hear the dry cleaning bill for red wine is quite steep. As the guards dragged Marcus through the double doors and Bella sank to the floor in a puddle of tulle and tears, my mother made her move. Linda Ever, the survivor, decided that loyalty was a flexible concept. She smoothed her skirt, forced a smile onto her pale face, and stepped over her weeping daughter to get to me. Ava, sweetheart, she cooed, reaching out a trembling hand to touch my arm. Her voice was dripping with a sickly sweet affection that made my skin crawl. "We didn't know," she said, her eyes pleading. "We honestly didn't know you were so successful. If you had just told us, we would have celebrated you. You know how proud I am of you, right? I have always said you were the smart one." She tried to laugh, but it came out as a nervous choke. "Marcus and Bella, well, they are young and foolish. But you and I, we are mother and daughter, we are blood. And now that you are so established, we can finally have that relationship we always wanted. I can come visit you in the city. We can go shopping. We can redecorate the Connecticut house together." She looked at Julian, batting her eyelashes. "And Julian, what a charming man. I would love to get to know my son-in-law properly. Perhaps over a private dinner. Just the three of us." I looked at her hand on my arm. Then I looked at her face. I saw the greed swimming in her eyes. She didn't see a daughter. She saw a lifeline. She saw a walking ATM machine that could replace the one she had just lost. I didn't pull away. I didn't yell. I simply turned my head slightly and made eye contact with the head butler who had been standing silently by the wall. "Alfred I," said Softy. "Yes, madam," the butler replied, stepping forward instantly. "Please escort this woman off the premises," I said, my voice devoid of any warmth. My mother's smile froze. "What, Ava, you are joking. I am your mother. This is my anniversary party. This is my resort, Linda," I corrected her. "I own the land, I own the building, I own the wine you drank and the chair you are standing next to. And I reserve the right to refuse service to anyone." I gently removed her hand from my arm as if it were a piece of lint. "The party is over," I said. "You have exactly 10 minutes to vacate the property before I have the guards assist you. And do not worry about the bill. Consider the evening a final gift. You will need to save your money for the eviction lawyers when the bank comes for your house." "Ava!" she screamed, her facade cracking as Alfred took her elbow. "You cannot do this. You owe me. I gave you life. I turned my back on her. You gave me life," I whispered to myself. "And tonight I am taking yours back." The sound of her protests faded as the doors swung shut, leaving me standing in the silence of the empty ballroom. The air felt cleaner. The weight that had been pressing on my chest for 5 years was finally gone. Julian wrapped his arm around my shoulders, pulling me close. "Ready to go home?" he asked. I looked up at him and smiled. "Yes, let's go home." We walked out onto the lawn, the cool night air whipping around us. The helicopter was waiting, its rotors spinning slowly, a dark beast ready to return us to our world. A world where power was real, not rented. A world where respect was earned, not demanded. As we climbed into the leather seats of the aircraft, I looked out the window. Down below on the driveway, I could see 3 small figures standing next to a leased SUV. They looked like ants. Marcus was slumped against the hood head in his hands. Bella was screaming at her phone. My mother was standing there staring up at the sky, watching the machine that carried away her only chance at salvation. I knew that tomorrow they would try to call. They would send texts begging for forgiveness. They would play the victim to anyone who would listen. They would expect me to crack, to feel guilty, to send a check just to make the noise stop. But they were wrong. The Ava they knew was dead. The woman sitting in this helicopter didn't believe in second chances for people who used the first one to stab her in the back. I wasn't going to sue them into oblivion. I wasn't going to hunt them down. I was going to do something far worse. I was going to ignore them. I would cut off every financial tie. No more bailouts, no more birthday checks, no more connections. I would let the brutal, unforgiving machinery of the real world chew them up. Marcus would have to face his debts without a safety net. Bella would have to learn that likes do not pay the rent. And my mother would have to live in the quiet, crumbling reality of her own making. That is the true punishment of capitalism. You do not have to destroy your enemies. You just have to withdraw your capital and let them destroy themselves. Julian took my hand as the helicopter lifted off the ground, falling away beneath us. The lights of the resort grew smaller and smaller until they were just twinkling stars in the darkness. They traded family for a fantasy I thought watching them disappear. They wanted a show. Well, they got the finale. I squeezed my husband's hand, feeling the solid, reassuring warmth of the only family I would ever need. I hope you enjoyed watching the trash get taken out as much as I did. Justice is not always loud. Sometimes it is just the sound of a helicopter flying away from people who never deserved to be on board. If you felt a sense of relief when Marcus was dragged out, or if you smiled when my mother realized she was homeless, type the word karma in the comments below. Let me know which part was your favorite, and do not forget to like and subscribe for more stories of people getting exactly what they deserve. Until next time, remember, the best revenge is a life well lived and a bank account they cannot touch.